Good afternoon. This is Sergeant First Class Vos, CMF 91, Talent Management NCO. Sergeant Tucker.
Sergeant First Class Tucker, 89 Delta, Talent Management NCO. So this is our second episode of the HRC Enlisted Ordnance Branch podcast. The first one we kind of did an introduction, kind of talked about what the intent was, how we were hoping to have a little more conversational, just a more relaxed way to get the information across. So we are always looking for feedback, any ways we can change the setup, any of the formatting things that make it more accessible or make it more useful and entertaining and informative is kind of what we're going for. Today we're going to focus in on the Enlisted Manning Cycle. So a lot of the questions that we get are related to the assignment process and Enlisted Manning Cycle. So we made a list of key points that we want to talk about and just kind of go over in a kind of a conversational way.
Yeah. When it comes to the Enlisted Manning Cycle, I mean, even though it's been around for a little bit now, I think a lot of people are still confused on it. There's still a lot of NCOs. This is their first time getting into it. Even a lot of senior NCOs who have been used to the old way of doing it, now have this mandatory, you have to participate in a Manning Cycle, and they just really don't understand it. And I mean, anybody going into anything new, we change, we got to adapt.
Well, kind of like you said, a lot of people haven't gone into it before. If you've, piece guessing because you've been on station for 2, 3, 4 years, however long you've been on station, then a lot of people, it's still their first time because it started while they were already PCS somewhere.
Yep.
So the first thing I want to look at is kind of backing up to a bigger picture look at it. And so as far as the assignment process goes, we have the Enlisted Manning Cycle, and there's 4 of those a year. They're not exactly tied quite to the quarters. Some of the dates are a little off. Always check the calendar to make sure you know when the cycles are happening. But generally it follows the quarters, and that makes it a little easier to keep in your head. But the assignment process, it's all going to start from a readiness side point. And so when you go back and you look at the unit manning authorizations, they come from a TDA or from an MTO, that manning document is going to say what you're authorized in the unit. Now, it goes from that original document that establishes what the strength should be, and then we look at the active component manning guidance, because in some MOSs you're going to have situations where you're short. I'm sure with the 91 series you guys have some that are at better strengths than others.
Yeah, I mean, we're always short on the platform specific guys, they're always hurting. And really now with the Manning Cycle, we really can't fill those units outside of that. So some units, they reach out and, if they're depending on the guidance that, they have, whether they're a CAT A, B, or C, they say, hey, I'm short. Well, if you contact me now and we look at it, and again, at our level, we don't control what goes into the market. But we've got
that's for the readiness side.
Yeah.
And so the reason I bring that up is because the active component manning guidance, the categories that he was talking about, where that goes into is what we call targets. And so say, my numbers are easy when I'm looking at master sergeants because there's 100 authorizations. So it works out pretty easy.
Yeah.
Nice round number to work with. If we're only at 90%, that means I only have 90 master sergeants to work with. So that means 10 units are going to get shorted. But we've got to figure out where that's going to happen. So as the numbers get bigger and bigger, as you look at bigger populations, that's where those categories of Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, which manning category the unit's in, is going to figure out how we spread that peanut butter. And so it may be a question of you're authorized 8 staff sergeants at this particular MOS. But because of where you're at in the manning categories, the whole Army doesn't have enough to fill all those authorizations. So everybody's got to take a little hit. So you might only get 6 as opposed to the authorized 8. So there's authorization and then the targets. The targets is based on the inventory we have. What can we actually get accomplished? That's going to go to the folks over at the Readiness Division, and they're the ones that build the requisitions and make sure those are in the system for us to align soldiers to. So they work with the spaces, we work with the faces.
Yep.
And that's kind of how that process starts. Now, where this ties into the Enlisted Manning Cycle is that those are put in for a specific time at windows. Those windows line up with the soldiers based on what their timelines are. So those requisitions have a specific date on when they need to get filled, and then the soldiers have a specific time on when they're going to the market.
Yep.
And that's kind of what you were talking about with the the soldier side of the market.
Yeah, I think when it comes to those requisitions of what's available, like the preferences that you get, a lot of people reach out and they say, "Hey, what's going to be in the next market?" I mean, we don't know. We don't know what's going to be in the next market. And that, like you said, it's all on readiness division. And so, I always have to tell people, say, "Hey, we're going to have to wait until the market comes. Market opens. Once the market opens, we can see what's in there. But prior to that, we at Ordnance Branch can't see that." And I think that's a big point that people don't understand.
Yeah, there's a pretty long calendar associated with all this. Like this,
Yeah.
it's on a time frame of that. The EMC is going to start at this point. Readiness is going to have the numbers they need to meet at this point. Then they start building the market. Then soldiers are going to go into the market. But even the market itself, it can feel. I know when the market's coming, a lot of soldiers reach out asking that exact question: "What's going to be in there?" And it's like.
Yeah.
I know you're impatient. I get it. You're trying to figure out where your family's going to be. That's important. I absolutely understand. But that's one of the reasons the market's so long. The market is 6 weeks long.
Yep.
And so if you're not able to preference that first day, it happens. You've got time to look at it, look at all those assignments that are in there, screenshot it. Do whatever. Take that list and talk to your NCO support channel. Go show it to your significant other. Show it to family members. Talk to your battle buddies. Find out what good information you can find about, because you got 6 weeks. And so you've got some time in there prior to the market closing.
Yeah. So when it comes to EMCs, like currently we're in EMC 2304, and EMCs are essentially a pool of YMAVs that they cover, almost like a quarter of a, usually, like say 2304, is you're going to have a report. If you participate in EMC 2304, you're going to have report dates anywhere from September to November of 2023. So realistically, they're happening. You see your YMAV, you should be preparing about a year prior to be entering that market, or have an idea. If you haven't looked at an actual EMC calendar, you can look at your YMAV and you can anticipate, based on your YMAV, what market you'll be going into, like I said, if you haven't seen the calendar. And sometimes that calendar changes left or right depending on requirements and whatnot.
That's actually a really good point about that calendar, because like we were saying, the marketplace fits into an EMC. So the EMC is like that whole quarter. So anybody that's moving during that whole time frame is part of that EMC. And the marketplace is just one piece of that. And I think that's just like a terminology issue that some folks have, is the market and the EMC, the market's part of the EMC, but the whole EMC is also going to include soldiers graduating AIT. It's also going to include nominative branch actions. It's also going to include drill sergeant, selects. You're going to have your recruiters, all these different, anybody that moves in that time frame. If they're enlisted and they're moving, it's going to be in the EMC. The marketplace is just one chunk of that. But to get to your point about the calendar, if you guys reach out and either ask us, email, on Teams, however you can get a hold of us and ask about that calendar, we can provide that to you, because being able to plan off your YMAV, like Sergeant Vos was suggesting, is hugely important. It's beneficial to you and your unit, because that gives you a date that's predictable. And I know that my recommendation I make to a lot of leaders is that if you're in a leadership position, you have soldiers that are NCOs that have YMAVs, put that in your leader book. If you've got a leader book that's got like the 3 days on NCOER, how many children they have, what's their anniversary, like all that kind of data, soldier data.
Yeah, here's their YMAV.
Put that YMAV in there, because then you can plan ahead on, like, I see you're supposed to move when we have an NTC rotation, or hey, we got a deployment coming up. This soldier moves before then or after then. Like, you can make those adjustments before, and that's a critical part about managing the YMAVs and knowing what timelines you're on.
I mean, that both for the soldier, NCO, and leader, is too many times, and I'm sure you've seen it with the 89s. I know especially with the 91s, as many people as I got. Both I have NCOs and their leadership surprised. Like, oh, his YMAV is this. Why isn't this marketplace? Well, I mean, had you reached out, or if you don't know, you don't know. The squeaky wheel gets greased. Just ask. If you don't know.
Yeah, like you said, a lot of people are new to it, and so they know they have a YMAV, but they think the market's going to happen then.
Yeah,
and the YMAV is the report date, not the market. Like,
Yeah, and they're like, oh, this NCO is in this market, but I was going to keep him. Well, I mean, had you paid attention to your YMAV and known that your manning cycle was coming up, we could have you could have caught that prior and stabilized them. But now that they're in the market, there's if there wasn't an action put in place 45 days prior to the opening of that market, realistically, it's like, hey, you're going to participate in the market and you're going to PCS to the to wherever you're slated to go. The action is a big piece. Again, I think with the surprise of people getting put into markets, manning cycles, maybe if they just didn't have a clear idea of their YMAV, or if their YMAV changed, that does happen as well. If it is their intent or your intent, that soldier, that leader, if they want to stay where they're at, or process any action that could affect them being a part of that marketplace, 45 days prior to the marketing open is the no later than date. I mean, of course, we still get, stuff happens. We still get actions coming in after that. Now, we don't necessarily, we can return it without action if we don't, if we deem so.
It's simple. If you send it up, we're going to consider it. We're going to at least look about it, at least look at it and have a conversation. But the analogy I've made before is it's a bit like trying to find somebody to fill staff duty for you. Mm-hmm. If you're doing it like a month out, it's a lot easier to figure out. It's a lot more time to solve the problem because something's got to adjust.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're trying to fill a day prior to find somebody to take that shift, that's a lot harder to do. So I'm glad you mentioned the 45 days because that's a specific mark. That's why the assignment managers usually send out those pre-market emails letting you know, like, hey, you're expected to be in this market. Please update your EFMP if that's a concern. If you have anything like that you need to do, things you're trying to volunteer for, nominative assignments you're trying to reach out at, whatever career decision and life planning you've got going on, here's a heads up. Because if you're going to drop one of those 4187s for a stabilization or anything, now's the time. Don't wait till you get locked in there. Yeah,
I think a trend I've seen recently, of course, like there's a lot of reasons for people to set up actions after the fact, after they're already set for in the market. But I don't know what it is within CMF 91 specifically, and I can't imagine you've seen it in the 89 Delta world, but we have a lot of people going to SRUs, to soldier recovery units.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, in which, they do an interpost transfer, they go to the SRUs, and they say, hey, you need to be here for 2 years as a cadre. Well, the problem that's happening, and like I said, it is a trend, I don't know what's going on. Just within the past 2 manning cycles, I've had 10, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is. To where they're not stabilized, they show up to the SRUs, 2 months later they're in a market, and then guess what? If that 4187 for stabilization comes up after that, after you're already in the market, I haven't seen a single one approved.
Yeah, that's a really good point about the interpost transfers. As regardless of whatever reason you're doing an interpost transfer, so I've seen it before where we had a guy, picks up rank. Now he's in the wrong grade, in position. But hey, you made master sergeant. We've got a first sergeant spot for you right over here, and so they'll move him. Makes perfect sense. I understand it. You're utilizing the talent you have. Awesome. The thing that's different though is if you are going through a G1 or local installation to do an interpost transfer, it doesn't reset the YMAV. So it does not reset your time. And a lot of people think, oh, but I changed commands. And it's like, well, you did, but it didn't come to us. And so if we don't do it, then it doesn't set the YMAV. So the recommendation is if you have soldiers or leaders out there that are moving interpost like that, your best bet is to reach out to the career branch and talk to us about it, because if I see like, hey, you're trying to do what? Hey, that makes sense. I know what you're doing. You're moving from 5th group on Campbell to 71st group on Campbell. Got it. Those are 2 different jobs. You're doing 2 different things, progressing in your career, all solid. If I'm the one that actions that assignment, it resets the YMAV. If you go through the G1, it's not going to automatically do that. And so that's a really good point.
Yeah, and if it's, I think if they're not coordinating with us, which a lot of people don't do when it comes to interpost transfer, because of the belief that my YMAV is going to, my time is going to restart if I move to this other unit.
Yeah, they think they're ducking it. It's like that's,
if they don't, if you don't reach out to us and the move is already made, or we don't support it, or whatever the case may be, an organizational stabilization or some type of stabilization to keep them in that unit would be the best route for that organization, of course, prior to the market.
Yeah, prior to the market. That's the key, is knowing your timelines, because staying prior to the market is the key to a lot of that.
Yeah. So when it comes to the market, preferences, right? So
I'm glad you're following our little little notes there, because otherwise we're going to talk about actions all day.
I know, right? When it comes to preferences, right? So in different markets, like say you'll have the 91 X-ray market, the 89 Delta market, the 91 Zulu market, 91 Sierra 30 market. There's different levels. Each market is different from each other. And by different, I mean they're going to have different preferences because they're aimed towards, if you're a 91 Sierra 40, obviously you don't qualify to fill a 91 Charlie 30 spot or whatever the case may be. So it'll be very specific to where can a 91 Sierra 40 be and where is the need for those requisitions. Some, like I said, I say 91 Sierra because I'm a 91 Sierra myself, so I know personally, I think in this recent market they only had maybe 5-6 options, whereas the 91 X-rays will have over 70 in some cases. And what people do is they'll go through their preferences and they'll be like, here's my favorite ones and I'm going to leave the rest because I don't want to fill out 1 through 74. But what's happening is, say you pick your top 3 and you don't fill out the rest, right? So you got your number 1, your number 2, your number 3, and then you have 71 more options. Well, those 71 more options just became your number 4. And if we fill any of those requisitions, we can say, hey, we gave them their top 5.
Now, obviously, it's not like we're intentionally doing that to
Yeah.
try to cheat the soldier, but like that's how it's going to look, and that's the assumption is that like if you don't fill the rest of those out, then they're all of equal value to you.
Yep.
And to really kind of understand how much like the preference is the name of the game when it comes to the slating process and how we figure out who's going to go where, because we're asking the soldiers. If you think about the way we used to do it with the old EMC when I first got here, was in the old EMC you essentially had all these requisitions coming from Readiness Division coming into your pot, of these available assignments. And the assignment managers and talent management NCOs would try to fill those assignments that they came in. Well, that almost gave you not quite a first come first serve, but a little bit.
Yeah.
And to where you could reach out in February and get a very different response than if you had reached out in April or March. And so like you may even have like, well, in that example, like January and March are both in the same quarter. They're both in the same EMC. But you have very different responses if there happens to be a lot of instructor recs that all get filled in January because you have so many volunteers. Comes around in March time frame, well, you didn't call me soon enough, so I don't have any left. And so it was hard to communicate that to the field of when we had those pockets of assignments coming in. And so the idea of the marketplace was really like, all right, what if we just took all the assignments that would happen that quarter, out of all the Joes that were gonna PCS in that quarter, and we'll just put all that stack of assignments in a room and we'll all just put dibs on it.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like where the preference concept came from. If rather than being like, oh, well, he and I have pretty similar move cycles, but I didn't get that one because I called in February instead of January. Like,
Yeah.
how would I know to call in January? So this like puts it all in one lump so that everybody can have like a fair shot at saying what they want. So that's kind of where the preference concept comes from. Everybody goes in there, makes their preferences. And then there's a lot of like misconceptions about how that deck is shuffled, like where those results come from. And it's kind of tricky to explain, but really the preference is going to be the number one moneymaker in there. Like that's going to be the thing that has the most influence. It's not necessarily a competition of like, oh, my OML's better, so that means I'm going to beat him and he's not going to get the assignment he wants, I'm going to get it.
Yeah.
It doesn't really work. Like OML's taken into as a factor, but it's not like a competition.
But yeah, I had an individual who was kind of upset that we weren't utilizing OMLs to fill a very popular location. But when it comes down to the special considerations for individuals, if you have a location that is very popular, and everybody preferences that number one location, I think there's a very slim chance that obviously not everybody can have their number one. Especially like say for the 91s, it's always for some reason it's always either Fort Lee or somewhere in Florida. Right, those are like the most popular ones.
Yeah, either career progression or nice location. Like those are the two things most people are
nice
after.
location is what. But if everybody's putting Fort Lee as their number one, not everybody's going to get that. and what we first must consider before we talk about OMLs, right? Because I think that was, I think when the OMLs were fielded, I don't want to say fielded, but
Yeah, a lot of people said, this is going to involve schools, this is going to involve assignments, and it does involve assignments, but I think a lot of folks get a little misled on how.
yeah,
And so they'll think that it gives them an edge to compete in the marketplace, whereas that's not where it cuts. That's not where it's involved. Like, it's involved in the market process, but it's actually earlier than you start. Like, once the soldier's making preference, OML's really already been accounted for, because there are certain circumstances. If you have a really, really high OML, like say you're a sergeant first class and your OML is number 5, and you can go on HRC's promotion projections thing, and it says there's 20 projected promotions to master sergeant in the next year. Why on earth would I put this guy on assignment to an E7 location? Like, I know in the next year he's going to pick up. Why would I do that?
Right.
So that soldier will actually get a different marketplace. Like, that's how the OML comes into play. It's because they won't get that spot in Florida for an E7, because, bro, you're not going to be an E7 in 3 months. Like, you're going to pick up. Like, we need you
you're
to
going
be
to get part of that. You know, if you're a 91 X-ray, you'll be a part of that 91 Zulu market.
Yeah, and then also it kind of, there was a concern when they started talking about marketplace. It actually came up when they first started the officer with the AIM-2 marketplace. When they first started looking at it, they were worried, does this mean desirable locations are going to get all the top performers?
Yeah.
And the less desirable places are going to get the
bottom.
less competitive individuals.
Exactly,
Like,
yeah.
are you going to end up with, like, this unit's great because the scenery's great, and like everybody wants to go there. And so what they determined is, a lot of times the randomness of folks' personal preferences actually alleviated a lot of those problems. And so the preference really does make the number one influence on what happens in the slating process.
Yeah. And I don't know why, so many people have talked about it. It was actually a first sergeant that had talked about it recently, that they were part of a brief, a Manning Cycle brief, not by us, but by somebody who gave them tips and tricks to try to better their chances of getting one of their number 1, 2, or 3 options. But there is no algorithm, and there is no secret to it. And like I said, it keeps getting talked about, not only on Facebook forums, but here in HRC, people that we've interacted with, excuse me, who ask, "What's the secret?" There is no secret.
Yeah, because I've heard a number of them, like doing it in reverse order because the Army's just trying to get you anyway. So whatever you put as your worst idea is what they'll take.
Yeah,
like, that's a terrible idea, man.
I've actually, 2 people in the past couple weeks have said, I put my number 1 as my bottom because I heard there's an algorithm.
It's like,
That is not how that works.
That's a gross misunderstanding of how it works.
Very.
I've heard people also say, like, well, I'll put my number 1 as my number 2 because if I don't get my number 1, I win. That's like, that's still not winning. Like, the Army is actually giving a moment for you to give your 2 cents. They're actually asking your opinion.
Yeah.
Give it. Be honest with your opinion, because the way that's going to work is, now he mentioned the bad word algorithm. It's funny because for a couple months it was like a buzzword. Everybody was saying it. Everybody was all over it. Like, ooh, it sounds so high speed.
Yeah,
in
the
science.
algorithm. I got to figure it out.
And then it became a bad word. It became like a pariah. Like, no, you don't say algorithm. Like, don't, like, because people were taking it way too far to understand what it means.
Yeah.
It was just part of the slating process. And so to, like, understand the slating process, it's multiple steps. So kind of like the analogy I made earlier of a bunch of folks standing around, like, throwing dibs on, like, I like that assignment, I like that one. What about you, man? What do you like this one? And I might say, like, I really want this one. And you're like, I really want that one, and it's good for the career and, like, personally. And I was like, okay, well, I didn't really like that one that much.
Yeah.
For you, man, you go ahead and take that one. I like this one too. So I'm 50-50. And so it would almost be like, how would you do that? Like, buddy to buddy, like peer conversation? That's pretty easy. And in fact, one of my first markets, we only had 5 master sergeants in the same market. Those jokers all called each other. They got on the phone and called each other and, like, talked it out, and they all number 1 different places, and everybody got their number 1.
Yeah, I mean,
So it's, in theory, it could happen, but the problem is when you have 50 people in the market, a lot of those folks are number 1 in the same place. And so we got to figure out who's going to get it, how do we cut that, how do we slice that?
Exactly.
And where that's going to come down is, like, it's a process of looking at the outcomes. And so, like, for example, if you and I are in the same marketplace and we both number 1 some Tahiti,
Yeah.
some hot spot on the beach that we think is awesome. We build number one that. Well, obviously both of us can't get the one slot, so it's going to look at our number twos. What's your number two? Well, your number two is the other beach vacation hotspot. My number two is Fort Polk because I like gumbo. Or whatever reason, I've got something different. It goes, ooh, Fort Polk's a little easier to fill because it's not going to be as high on the priority list.
Right.
Not priority list, popularity list. Not as
Right.
many people are number oneing and twoing that one. And so it's going to try to figure out, it's like, I know Fort Polk's Tucker's number 2, but it's Vos's number 13, and it's Smith's number 12, and it's Jenkins' number 85. He hates it. If I take it as number 2, that's the best result I can give for the overall market, because then it can get you your number 1, and this guy can get his number 2, this guy can get his 3. And so the idea is like, we're looking at the different outcomes to see what's the outcome that gets everybody as high a preference as possible. Now that's a lot of numbers, and that's a lot of trial and error and going back and forth and trying over and over and over. And you can do it manually on an Excel spreadsheet, and it will melt your brain, and it's terrible and awful.
Yeah.
But running a bunch of like simulations and running a bunch of examples and doing those kind of calculations is exactly what a computer's good at.
Yeah.
So that's where the algorithm comes in. It just runs all those possibilities for us to show us mathematically the happiest outcome. So that's where a lot of the buzzword and talk of algorithm gives you assignment, algorithm does this, and it's like, algorithm just starts the day.
Yep.
Algorithm is just the rough draft that gives me an output that I can look at and say like, okay, now let's get to work. And that get to work process is going to be your talent management and your assignment manager going through and putting that human factor on it and going through and actually finalizing these assignments. Like I said, that's more of just a rough draft to show us, hey, this is mathematically what the computer thinks is the happy answer. And then we go through and go like, that's not a good answer because that soldier can't go to that position because they're not qualified.
Yep.
That soldier can't go to this position, or this position has specific screening criteria that I have to screen for. And so like that's where that individual scrub is going to come through, and that's where talent management, looking after soldiers, the people first initiative, all those kind of things are coming into play during that time frame.
Yeah. Also looking at is EFMP available for these locations?
Exactly.
Because the EFMP screening is a completely different program that we utilize. So it's not like the market can see that. So if the market slates an individual, it may work in their favor, because if the market, if they auto slate to Fort Polk, right, was their best possible outcome is that's going to be their number 12, hypothetically. But EFMP was denied for that location. But EFMP was approved for their number 3 location. Then, of course, that's where we come in and we say, okay, this isn't going to work. We have to move this individual, put them in their number 3, and then go from there. And also coordinating with other branches if somebody's MACP.
Yeah. So if you got married soldiers, trying to make sure that they have the opportunity for a joint domicile.
Yep.
You got to reach out to them and find out what marketplace are they in. Are these two soldiers in the same marketplace? If they are, cool. Have them both preference. Have them cross-check their list together, and then if the results work, they work. If they don't, and you have one NCO getting slated to Fort Lee, the other one getting slated to Fort Irwin, well, that doesn't work. Now we're going to coordinate with that career branch and make sure that we find the assignment that fits. I'm glad you mentioned EFMP, because the other recommendation for folks is if you are an NCO with EFMP family members, try to get your preferences in as early as possible. Because once you put your preferences in, that allows us to submit those checks to see, does the EFMP care that you specifically need, is it supported at that location? And so we can do that during the market, because like I said earlier, it's a long market. It's 6 weeks long. We can start that like week 1, week 2, start that screening then. That way, at the end of the market, there's not a delay where you're sitting there wondering, why is everybody else getting assignments and I don't? What's going on? I haven't got mine yet. I haven't heard of what's happening. We've already screened, checked, found the happy spot that you're going to go, figured it out, and that way you can get the assignment on time with everybody else.
Yeah,
So,
and I'm glad you mentioned that, because, again, you glad I mentioned EFMP. I'm glad that you mentioned the timeline, because what some people do is, I don't know why, some people, they know they're in the market, they know they have preferences, but they want to wait, right? And in some cases, it might work out in their favor, because there are such things as throughout the market, readiness may put another available assignment into the marketplace for somebody to look at, or they may take something out. But the EFMPs, with a new EFMP system, I don't know why, but it seems to take much longer than the older EFMP system for results to come back. And so, I mean, I've seen them take up to 2 weeks in some cases. So,
Well, that's a mixed bag. I think it also, you're a little bit biased based on when you got here.
yeah.
Because I know having worked here for a while,
Yeah.
the 2 weeks was actually the standard.
Yeah.
When I first got here, 2 weeks was the standard in 1 month for Oconus.
Oh, goodness.
And I had seen them go over that plenty of times. And it's not that the people in that office aren't working hard. They are. That's just
absolutely.
a lot of information to check.
Yeah.
The new web-based system, the Enterprise EFMP,
Yep.
is much faster, but because it's faster, we can use it with the market, which is what leads to those like 2 weeks times that you were talking about.
Yeah,
Is that
yeah.
like we're checking multiple assignments to make sure that because we don't know which one in the market you're going to.
Exactly.
We got to check like your top 10. Like we're looking at all of them to see which ones would be feasible, because your top 10, half of them might not even provide the services you need.
Right.
And so it's,
And I think another thing worth mentioning is, outside of VFMP, outside of MACP and other special considerations, is people with assignment preference. So an individual
Yeah.
coming out of Fort Irwin, as an OCE, they get their number one preference. People coming out of SFAB, if they're a plank holder, they get one of their top 3. I mean, if they're not a plank holder, even coming out of SFAB, they get one of their top 5. And that's something that we have to honor. And so, if there's only one Eglin Air Force Base available, and you have somebody coming out of Fort Irwin and they preference that as their number one, well, guess what? They're going to be the one to get that.
yeah, 'cause they've got that tool in their pocket.
Yeah.
It's a deal the Army made with them. Like,
Yep.
hey, you go take that assignment. We'll give you that preferential treatment coming out to take care of you, because you're going to take care of something that we need, solid volunteers for. So that is another part of the slating process to figure
Yep.
all those things out.
But yeah, I mean, when it comes to the market, I mean, anything else you want to add?
I think communication is a key element on this. One of the things that I saw a little bit of friction feedback from the field was that the assignments you can make in the market don't always align with your professional development model. And so, like, you may have options in the market that might not be the best career move. And I know some folks are like, well, back in the day, the assignment manager would say, no, you need broadening. You're going on a broadening. In this case, the soldiers can preference. So we gave the power to make choices to the soldier, but to the leaders, I would say sometimes that gives the soldiers the power to make uninformed choices.
Yeah.
So that's where, as the branch and then out there to the leadership, that's our opportunity to mentor, advise, give people some input on what are good career moves, what assignments would be beneficial, or just advice on what the local area is like. Because some of these installations, if you've never been to them, you might not know what the local community has to offer. And so be able to do that research. So the recommendation is, like, 1, leaders engage and talk about these duty stations and assignment opportunities. 2, if you're the person in the market, when that market first opens, screenshot that thing and do, like I said, go talk to your battle buddy, go talk to your NCO support channel, go talk to the friends, family, just whoever, like, hey, I was looking at this assignment, this job sounds pretty cool, this position, like, I've never worked in this kind of unit before, what do you know? Find that stuff out, because it is 6 weeks long. So you could actually preference day 1, put all your preferences in there, and then 2 weeks down the road get a chance to talk to an old buddy of yours and to find out that this job that he's working at now is the coolest thing you've ever heard of. And you can go back and adjust your preferences. So you can actually go back in and change your preferences. And so there's nothing wrong with that. All the business of sorting out everything is done at the very end. So any changes, like, we're not going to go back and say, like, well, first you had this and then you changed your mind. Nope. Whatever the end result is, the end result. So if you change your preferences along the way, awesome, as long as you're staying informed.
Yep. Once the market closes, that's what we're going off of. I think it is you had mentioned considering broadening and generating assignments, right?
Yeah.
For when you go into the market, you do have like a note, right? Say, consider a possible broadening assignment, generating assignment, operating assignment, right? That is just a suggestion, right? So most of the time, at least when I go in and update those, if somebody has not been a recruiter, a drill sergeant, instructor, OCT, anything along those lines, I'm going to say consider a broadening or generating assignment. Now, that does not mean that you have to, right? Like
Yeah,
it's all
and
like,
it doesn't influence the game.
Yeah, it
like
doesn't
as far as
change
like
anything.
I hate saying the game, but you know what I
Yeah.
mean. Like the
Yeah.
results of the marketplace, it doesn't really influence it. It's just a professional guidance, just very generic. If you're looking for more specific information, like, well, I was looking at this assignment, is that considered generating? Feel free to reach out. You know, we are more than willing to have those kind of conversations, advise people on what kind of assignments are good for different experiences and what
Yeah.
builds them. And I think one of the key things I like about the marketplace concept of letting people preference outside of the normal path is that I don't know your path. Like I don't know what your career is built around, what you're trying to do with your situation. So you may have somebody that like intentionally is trying to get experience with certain types of units because that's a career path that leads them to a specific kind of warrant packet or
Yeah.
a specific assessment program that they want to do, or they're just trying to log more resume hours so that when they retire, they have a lot of experience at this kind of job. And so those are things that I don't know what your career path is. Likewise with family. Like I talked to a soldier that, in his case, staying at Fort Bliss, operational assignments. We don't have any broadening or generating assignments out of Fort Bliss.
Yep.
He wanted to stay out there, but it's because his family care plan worked there because he had family who lived in El Paso. So he had support. So when he needs to go to the field, go to the range or whatever, he's got that local support from family. So his preference was to stay there because with his family situation, if he had PCS somewhere else, he would probably end his career earlier because he
Right.
didn't have the support.
Yeah.
So in that case, he's choosing Fort Bliss. Is that best for his career? Well, in his case, literally yes, because this is the only one that allows him in good conscience to continue his military career. And that's a choice that he makes for his family. Does that mean he's probably going to be kind of stagnant being only operational assignments for years and years and years? Maybe. But I've known lots of folks that stayed operational for a long time and still, progressed well, as long as you're seeing the performance in,
Yeah. Another note on broadening and generating assignments is if you have those options in your marketplace and you know that you have recently gotten a GOMAR or UCMJ or any type of disqualifier, if you don't have a security clearance, it probably wouldn't be in your best interest to put your top 4 as all broadening or generating assignments. I think individuals, if they just don't know, if you don't know if you qualify, you reach out. I mean, that's our job as talent management NCOs, both outside and inside of the market. I'm always screening people. Do they qualify? If the assignment managers reach out, say, hey, this person preference this, can you screen them and see if they qualify? And if they don't qualify, I actually just recently in this market, I was reviewing some people's preferences, and there was an NCO who put instructor number 1, ALU instructor number 2, recruiter, drill sergeant. Those are his top 4 choices that he put in his market, and I went and screened him, and he didn't qualify for a single one of them. So those are
It's almost like he wasted his top spots.
Exactly.
And
And
he
then,
wasted his draft picks.
right, and then he's gonna, and then it's what's going to happen, and if of course we reach out to him, but if he doesn't give any feedback, he doesn't change those preferences, well, then he's going to be upset that he got hey, why didn't I get, I got my number 10, why, or my number 5 or 6.
And honestly, if you go back and restack them, taking those ones out, you're probably starting to preference places that aren't as popular, and so you probably really got a really good chance of doing it. Getting your number 1.
Right.
I've seen that a few times where guys will put number 1 at a place that has a low popularity. Like you were talking about the popularity, you can see it over there
Yep.
on the corner. But I think a lot of us just know which assignments are usually pretty popular. Like it's pretty well known culturally.
Yeah.
But if you're number 1ing at a place that not a lot of people number 1, you got a real good shot at getting it, because like I said, the goal is to try to get everybody as good an answer as they can. And so when we say people first, the thing we got to kind of remember is it's all the people, not that one NCO.
Yeah.
We're trying to take care of all the NCOs. And so
Exactly.
sometimes that means you're going to have to wait in line a little bit because everybody gets a turn. And so if you're choosing one of those assignments that's a little lower in popularity, you're probably helping the game. Like you're helping the results be better for everybody else, because we can spread that along. Oh, that's your number 1? Cool, easy day. Take that one, you get number 1. That means these soldiers who don't want it number 1, they don't want that one at all. It's like number 18. They're not going to get it now because you took it.
Exactly.
And so that's kind of that shuffle of trying to match people with as high a preference as you can get them. Like we're trying to get the results of folks get what they want and the Army gets what it needs. Like that's the overall goal we're trying to get.
Yeah. But with that, even with everything that we talked about here, preference the assignments that are available to you as you want them. I would never tell anybody to preference anything different. I would just give them the information as I know it. Say, hey, you don't qualify to be an instructor at Fort Lee. And if they're like, well, I'm going to take my chances. If they want to leave it there, I mean, of course they're not going to be slated, but if they want to leave it there, that's their number one preference. Hey, go ahead. That's your number one preference. I'm not going to influence you to change anything.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of what you were talking about earlier about the tips and tricks to the game.
Yeah,
like there's no magic number of like, oh, whatever you put as your number. Like I had somebody tell me like, hey, everybody I know got their number 2, so that's where you want to put the one you really want. It's like, don't do that, because you're going to put some crazy thing as number 1, and we're going to be so happy to see that crazy number 1 that like nobody wants that as their number 1. You're going for sure, bud. We're thinking we made you happy. We're thinking we all want win-win, and it's like, no, it's not a win-win. So your best bet is preference according to your actual preference.
Yeah.
How you game it or how you increase your odds and how you find success in this is being educated on what those spots are and what they mean. Do that research, especially if you're in a very small career field. This is one I point out to my 89 Deltas pretty often, is that like, if you know there's a specific kind of job you need developmentally and you're going to a small isolated unit, like for me, it's places like Leonard Wood, Benning, Irwin, where you've only got one standalone company out there. If, like, say you're coming out of an instructor position, you picked up 7 while you're there, you need platoon sergeant time. You're looking for platoon sergeant time. You want to get back operational, get out in the field, and be a platoon sergeant. Reach out. Use that NCO support channel, or if you know somebody that knows somebody, it's, in those smaller communities we usually do. So you can reach out, find out, hey, if I'm looking for Irwin, because I've heard they've got a lot of hands-on experience, they get out in that range all the time. So I want to go out there to do my platoon sergeant time. Find out, make sure there's a platoon sergeant spot for you. Like, find out that's what's available, because you could also find yourself in a situation, because in the market, it doesn't say what the duty position is. It's just going to say what the unit is. So if they're trying to find an ops guy, that could be a rough time if you planned on, hey, I showed up to be a platoon sergeant. They're like, ooh, we don't have any vacancies at platoon sergeant. We've only got 3 of those. Yeah. And all 3 are dudes that just got there. And so, like...
So they're S3 now.
Yeah, so now you're in the ops section, because I don't have a platoon sergeant operational role for you. So especially in those small little niche spots, educate yourself on what's out there so you don't put yourself in a position. Yeah, so reaching out to those units, finding out, researching, educating yourself on what's the installation like, what's the position like, what are the opportunities there, as well as knowing those timelines, because some of these things we see soldiers having difficulty with, it's because they should have dropped a high school stabilization packet. Oh. They should have, adjusted their YMAV prior to getting the market. So really communicating, educating yourself on it. Preference, update your preferences as you learn more. If there's any mid-market injects, you'll get an email saying, hey, a couple of recs were added. Preference again. And so you can do it more than once. It's kind of a pain to go through all of them, because you have to do all of them, like your preference again. But it's worth the 5 minutes. Like, it's worth the effort to put that in there. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that, I know that we just talked about quite a bit. We're always available to be reached out to, and we can clarify a couple things. Hopefully that answered some of the questions out there. But I do have a couple of frequent questions that I get, right? And I know more specifically for me, because I have a lot more people to deal with. But I think you probably get the same questions as well.
This is the part that we hope in the future to have more of an interactive thing, where folks can leave comments, leave questions, or send them in. I don't know. Depends on the hosting how we end up setting this up technologically. But this part, we would like to get audience participation and feedback. Right. Let us know what you guys are wondering.
Yeah, and so when this video is posted, or however we post it, I think I'm going to leave say, hey, you have any questions for the next iteration of this? Hey, ask them below.
Yeah, there's a comment section, or send them to an inbox. Yeah, either way works.
But I know one of the questions I get frequently is, hey, I just made my preferences. The market isn't closed yet, but I just came down on a drill sergeant assignment. I get that quite a bit, because the CMF 91, we usually have a pretty big mission for each Manning cycle, and the best way to answer that is, when it comes to selecting individuals for drill sergeant recruiter or any other nominative assignment for that reason, we look at first who's available, who's eligible to move. Do they have enough time on station? I mean, what's more perfect than the people that are about to participate in the market? So, if you are in the current, EMC 2304 and you came down on a drill sergeant assignment, well, you were being looked at prior to this market even opening. It just so happened that the drill branch accepted them and put them on assignment after the fact. So I think with that though as well is if you do come down on a drill assignment and your market is open, I would like to tell people to still fill out your preferences, because even though, like say you come down on a drill assignment, but something pops up to where they're not eligible, right? And they remove them from that drill assignment. Well, one of two things is going to happen. Either you're going to stay in that market or you're going to get moved to the next market, right?
If you stay in the one, you may as well have your preference.
Yeah, and if you're still in that current market, even though you came on a drill assignment, still make those preferences, because
Just in case.
just in case. I've seen it a handful of times, but I know for some people they came down on drill, they're in the market, but they're like, well, I already came down on drill assignment, I'm going to fill out my preferences. But then they were disqualified, but then they got an assignment based on the market, but without any preferences. So they were a little upset about that. So if you do come down
That's
on
like
a
getting
recruiter,
kicked twice. Yeah, that's no good.
so if you do come down and drill any nominative assignment and you're in the marketplace, still fill out your preferences, because we can still go back to see that if you are further disqualified.
I think the context of that is it can be disheartening or a little confusing, misleading if you feel like you're going to the marketplace and suddenly you get a drill or recruiter assignment. While that can feel a little back and forth, the good part is it's better than what we used to do. Because before we had these like identified YMAVs and like more structure to it, folks could come down on drill sergeant not expecting to become a drill sergeant. Like, so you hear a lot of horror stories from back in the day.
Yep.
I don't know how many of them are accidents or how many of them are as bad as the stories are, but you hear about like, well, I was just working one day and suddenly boom, next thing I knew I was on assignment and I'm going to become a drill sergeant. I had no idea. And so at least by lining it to the markets, because like we talked about the EMC, marketplace is part of the EMC, but so is the DASSER mission. The DA selected recruiters and the drill sergeant missions are part of that EMC. Nominatives are all part of that EMC. So when that goes through, at least we have a YMAV to base it off of. Like, all right, you were supposed to move next summer. You're still moving next summer for this drill sergeant mission.
Yep.
Like that's where it's still tied to that timeline. So I can see where it can be frustrating if you're expecting one thing and get a different expectation.
Yep.
But we're still just trying really hard to stick with the expectation of the timeline. At least we're sticking to the timeline so you can plan things like high school stabilizations, like when your kid graduate.
Yep.
Like what life plans are you making? If we can stick to those dates, we might not always be able to stick to the locations. We might not always be able to stick to everyone's desires. But if we can give that predictability to the family, that's much better than what we've been doing in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I think another question I see frequently is, hey, I'm within a couple of years of retirement.
Yep.
I want to stay at Fort Bragg. That's usually where it is. Everybody wants to stay at Fort Bragg. That's where a lot of the retirement questions. I want to stay at Fort Bragg, but my market's coming up. What can I do?
Yeah, that's probably one of the most common ones I get, because I don't have as much of a drill sergeant mission just because we have a smaller number. But I do get a lot of folks that get in a good groove where they're at. Like they've either bought a house, they've got career skills programs they're looking at, or local colleges, or whatever reasons they want to stay where they're at. So there's a couple ways to address that, and it all depends on how close you are to that actual retirement date. So if you're within a year of retiring, then you probably won't come into the market at all. Because one of the things is if you go into the market, you're going to incur a service remaining obligation. And so we can look at, are you going into the market, are you within a year? A lot of times if can you communicate with the assignment manager. So communicate when you get that email saying, hey, you're going to the market, and be like, hey, I'm dropping a retirement packet. It'd be kind of silly to put me in the market. Okay, when's your packet going up? When are you eligible? Oh, in July. Okay, based on our timeline, okay, we'll push you one market out, let you drop your retirement packet.
Yeah.
That way we'll hook you up. In those cases, sometimes we can do that. Other times, folks are a little further out than that. And so like, if you're within a year and you receive an assignment, you can choose retirement in lieu of PCS. But that does put you on a timeline that's very specific. Like you will retire at your 20 year then, because you already said you're not doing it anymore.
Yeah.
But some folks want to do like 20 in a month because that works better for their whatever scheduling and their plan. But a lot more common is like the 2 years out. As the guy that's 2 years out, you can start your transitions program. Like you can go to your briefing, start your Soldier for Life transition, but you still might be coming up on that market because you've got enough time left on your contract.
Yep.
So there's two parts to remember. One, the system, to include us, will not assume you're going to retire at 20. We base it on your RCP. And so we're going to assume you're serving to your RCP until you tell us otherwise. So that's why you'll have people go like, why am I at 19 years going into a market? We assume you're going to your RCP. Now you tell us you're not, we can do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not close enough for that, if you're like at that 2-year window, there's actually, the HRC website has the guidelines on it, but you can submit for a special category stabilization. And what that does is allows you to stabilize with the intent of retiring. Like I'm within 2 years, I'm starting my transition stuff, I'm going to the briefings, learning about the finance, talking to VA, doing all these things. Drop that 4187. Once it gets approved, you'll get a G code, I think.
Yep.
It's a G code or W?
Yep, that's a special category.
G code.
Yeah.
So you'll get that G code put on your AEA, and you won't move. You'll be pulled right out of the market. You won't go into the market. But like everything else we talked about with the soldier actions is do it 45 days prior to the market to make sure you're good to go.
Absolutely. But yeah, I mean, I think that sums it up. Again, I'd mentioned there's a lot of information. Feel free to reach out to either of us or, your individual talent management NCO, if it's a Sergeant First Class Murphy or a Sergeant First Class Johnston.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, reach out to them, ask them questions. We got the answers. We can provide you the calendar of the upcoming Manning cycles, whether it be for yourself or for your team. But with that, there's another iteration of the HRC Enlisted Ordnance Branch podcast. If you have any suggestions, please let us know.
Yeah, feedback.
Yeah, give us some feedback.
If there's ways to do it better, let us know. Like Sergeant Vos said, I'll just echo the same thing, that like any feedback as well as just questions you have,
Exactly.
always feel free to reach out. It's much better to communicate and find out what we're trying to do and try to help soldiers get what they need, get what they're looking for. And we can't always make miracles happen, but we'll at least hear you out, let you know that your voice is being heard, and let you know like we can try. We can look at it. The worst that can happen is we get sold no. Yeah. But we'll always take a chance to see what we can do to help the soldier.
Or at least provide sound guidance. So
yeah.
But again, thank you for tuning in.
Appreciate it.
Look forward to you guys tuning in next time.